My daughter bought a luxurious house and then, as if nothing had happened, handed me the mortgage documents. You have enough savings. It's time to help the family. I refused, and she sued me for $700,000. The judge asked me only one question, which turned everything upside down. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The morning air still held a bite of winter as I rounded the corner onto Mockingbird Lane. March in Little Rock could surprise you that way. I'd walked 3 miles through the neighborhood, same route I took every morning since retiring from the firm 2 years back. Kept my mind sharp, kept my body from turning to rust. That's when I spotted the silver Lexus in my driveway, Gertrude's car. I hadn't heard from her in nearly 3 months, not since that awkward Christmas dinner where Marvin spent the entire meal scrolling through his phone. The sight triggered a flutter of curiosity rather than concern. Maybe they'd decided to surprise me with a visit, patch things up after the holiday tension. I climbed the porch steps and found them waiting by the door. Gertrude wore a cream-colored blazer I hadn't seen before, expensive looking. Marvin stood beside her in pressed khakis and a polo shirt, holding a manila envelope thick enough to stuff a chicken. "Dad!" Gertrude's smile was wide, theatrical. Perfect timing. I unlocked the door and gestured them inside. "Wasn't expecting you to? Everything all right?" "Better than all right." She practically bounced through the doorway. "We have incredible news." In the kitchen, I started the coffee maker out of habit. Hospitality ran deep in me, trained into my bones by my mother decades ago. Marvin settled into a chair at the small dining table like he owned the place, dropping that envelope in front of him with a thud that made the salt shaker jump. "Dad, we did it!" Gertrude perched on the edge of her seat, hands clasped together. "We finally bought our dream house. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, gorgeous lot in Chenal Valley. Can you even believe it?" Something warm expanded in my chest. "That's wonderful. Really, I'm happy for you both." "It's a beautiful property," Marvin added, his voice carrying that familiar edge of smugness. "Worth every penny of the $520 we paid." I poured 3 cups of coffee, added cream to mine. "You must have been saving for quite a while." "We put down $40,000. Gertrude accepted her cup, but didn't drink. Her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my hand pause halfway to my mouth. "That's where you come in." The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. She reached across the table and flipped open the envelope, pulling out a thick stack of papers, bank documents, mortgage agreements, amortization schedules. My trained eye caught the numbers even as my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. "You've got plenty in savings." Her tone had shifted, gone flat and businesslike. "It's time to help family. We put down the 40, you'll cover the rest. $3,200 a month for 15 years. I set my cup down carefully, buying myself seconds to think. "I'm sorry, what?" "The mortgage payment." She slid the papers closer, tapping her finger on a highlighted number. $3,200 monthly, we've already worked it out. You can easily afford it with your retirement accounts and Social Security. My mouth had gone dry. "Gertrude, you bought a house expecting me to pay for it?" "That's what normal parents do, Truman." Marvin leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. The smirk on his face made my jaw tighten. "They help their kids get started. Or were you planning to take it all to the grave?" The use of my first name, delivered with such casual disrespect, landed like a slap. But before I could respond, Gertrude jumped in, her voice rising with wounded indignation. "You were never there when I was growing up." Her eyes shimmered with what might have been genuine tears or practiced performance. "Always working, always busy with your precious clients and tax returns. The least you can do now is support us when we need you." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Truth wrapped around manipulation, a weapon she'd learned to wield with precision. I looked at the mortgage documents, at the amortization schedule showing 192 payments of $3,200. $576,000 they expected me to hand over. Nearly everything I'd saved across 35 years of careful planning and modest living. "I raised you." My voice came out quieter than intended. "I fed you, clothed you, paid for your college. Every penny I earned went into giving you a good life." "A good life?" Gertrude's laugh was bitter. "You gave me an empty house and a father who cared more about balance sheets than his own daughter." Marvin uncrossed his arms and leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Look, we're not asking for charity. We're asking you to act like family. If you can't do that, what does that say about you?" The anger building in my chest felt cold and heavy, like swallowing stones. I'd spent my entire career analyzing numbers, reading through financial statements to find the truth buried in columns and footnotes. That training kicked in now, cutting through the emotion to see the manipulation clearly. They hadn't called ahead. They'd shown up with documents already prepared. They'd rehearsed this scene, divided the roles between them. Gertrude playing wounded daughter, Marvin serving as the aggressive enforcer. This was an ambush. I stood up from the table. The chair legs scraped against the linoleum with a sound like tearing paper. Both of them looked up at me, surprise flickering across their faces. "I'm not paying for a house I didn't agree to buy." Each word came out measured, controlled, final. "Take your documents and leave. This conversation is over." "Dad, now!" I walked to the front door and opened it. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of the neighbor's freshly mowed lawn. I stood there, one hand on the doorknob, and waited. Gertrude gathered the papers slowly, making a show of her disappointment. Marvin rose without a word, but his eyes promised this wasn't finished. They walked past me without speaking, down the porch steps to their expensive car. I closed the door and locked it. The deadbolt sliding home sounded loud in the sudden silence. Back in the kitchen, the mortgage folder lay abandoned on the table. I picked it up but couldn't bring myself to open it yet. Instead, I walked to the window and watched their Lexus back out of the driveway and disappear down Mockingbird Lane. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else entirely. The coffee had gone cold. 2 weeks crawled by like months. I kept to my routine, morning walks, afternoon reading, evening news, but the confrontation replayed constantly in my head. I didn't call Gertrude. She didn't call me. The silence felt like standing in an empty room, waiting for something to shatter. It shattered on a Tuesday morning. The doorbell rang at 10:15, interrupting my second cup of coffee. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman in business, casual, holding a clipboard and a large envelope. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. I opened the door. "Are you Truman Gordon?" Her voice was professionally neutral, the tone of someone who delivered bad news for a living. "I am. I need you to sign here." She held out the clipboard and a pen. "You're being served with a civil complaint filed in Pulaski County Circuit Court." My hand felt disconnected from my body as I signed the receipt. She handed me the envelope, offered a brief nod of sympathy, and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away before closing the door. The envelope was heavier than it should have been. I carried it to the kitchen table, the same table where this nightmare had started, and sat down. My fingers fumbled with the metal clasp. Inside were legal documents, precisely formatted, filled with formal language that my accountant's brain automatically began to parse. Complaint for breach of oral contract and promissory estoppel. The plaintiff, Gertrude Gordon Hayes. The defendant, Truman Leonard Gordon. I skimmed past the procedural language to the meat of it. They were suing me for $700,000. I read that section twice, certain I'd misunderstood. But no, there it was in black and white. $700,000 in damages based on alleged oral promises to provide financial support for housing, living expenses, and future grandchildren's education. The complaint claimed I'd made these promises numerous times over several years, and that they had relied to their detriment on these assurances. It listed witnesses who would supposedly corroborate their story: Marvin's brother, Gertrude's college roommate, neighbors I'd never met. All lies, every single word. I set the papers down and pressed my palms against the table, feeling the solid wood beneath my hands. This wasn't about the mortgage anymore. This was something bigger, darker. They were trying to take everything I had. My phone sat on the counter. I picked it up and scrolled through my contacts until I found Warren Mitchell, a former colleague from the firm who'd retired a year before me. He answered on the third ring. "Warren, it's Truman. I need a recommendation for an attorney." I kept my voice steady, factual. "Family matter, someone who handles civil litigation and knows elder law. Yes, it's serious." He gave me a name without asking questions. Grace Pemberton, an attorney who'd represented his sister in a similar case. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately called her office. The receptionist scheduled me for late afternoon. That gave me 4 hours. I spent them in my home office, a converted bedroom where I'd kept files organized by year since I'd first started working in 1985. The filing cabinet was locked. I'd always been careful about documents, and I had the key on my desk drawer. I pulled folders systematically, starting with the most recent. Bank statements showing every transaction with Gertrude, birthday checks, Christmas gifts, the $5,000 loan in 2022 that she'd repaid within 6 months. Emails going back years, discussing everything from her job to her marriage to her complaints about money. Text messages I'd saved as screenshots, conversations where she'd never once mentioned expecting financial support beyond the occasional holiday gift. From another drawer, I retrieved my old smartphone, the one I'd upgraded from last year. I'd kept it because I'm constitutionally incapable of throwing away anything that might be useful. I connected it to my computer and exported the full text message history with Gertrude, 3 years of conversations in searchable format. By 3 o'clock, I had 4 organized folders: financial records, correspondence, call logs, and the lawsuit itself. Everything cross-referenced by date, everything labeled. 35 years of professional training had wired my brain for this kind of precision. Grace Pemberton's office occupied the 3rd floor of a building in the downtown Little Rock, about 20 minutes from my house. I drove there in afternoon traffic, the folders stacked on my passenger seat like ammunition. Her office was smaller than I expected, but immaculate. Law books lined one wall, diplomas and certifications covered another. She rose from behind her desk when the receptionist showed me in. A woman in her mid-50s with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that assessed me immediately. "Mr. Gordon," she shook my hand firmly. "Please, sit. Tell me what's going on." I handed her the lawsuit first. She read through it quickly, her expression unchanging. Then I passed her the folders, one at a time, explaining what each contained. "This is a financial exploitation case." She set the complaint aside and opened my financial records. "They're claiming oral promises for $700,000 without a single piece of written evidence. That's bold. I never promised to buy them a house." The words came out harder than intended. "I have records of every significant financial transaction with my daughter. I document everything. It's my training." Grace nodded, flipping through the bank statements. Her slight nod of approval told me she recognized quality documentation when she saw it. "This helps, but they're going to argue that oral promises don't require written proof, and they'll parade witnesses who will swear they heard you make commitments. Witnesses who will lie. Witnesses who will testify under oath." She looked up at me. "This is war, Mr. Gordon. They've declared it. We have good evidence, but we need it to be perfect. Can you handle this fight?" The question hung in the air between us. Could I handle watching my daughter try to destroy me financially? Could I stand across a courtroom from her and fight back without mercy? I thought about that mortgage folder on my kitchen table, the shocked look on their faces when I'd refused, the contempt in Marvin's voice, the practiced tears in Gertrude's eyes. "I can handle it," I said. Grace pulled out a legal pad and clicked her pen. "Good. Then let's get to work." I left her office an hour later with a strategy session scheduled for the following week and a growing list of additional documents to gather. I walked to my car through the fading afternoon light, placed her business card carefully in my wallet, and took a different route home than usual. The streets looked unfamiliar, but not unwelcoming. A new path for a new reality. My hands on the steering wheel felt steady now. The shaking was gone. This was war. I understood war. Numbers, evidence, strategy, precision. These were my weapons, had been my weapons for decades. I'd built a career on finding truth in financial chaos, on following paper trails through mazes of deception. They wanted $700,000. They'd get a fight instead. 3 days after meeting Grace, I returned to her office with a legal pad filled with notes. She'd given me homework: create a timeline of every financial interaction with Gertrude, gather correspondence, pull records going back as far as possible. I'd done better than that. Arkansas Code Section 525-111. Grace opened a thick statute book across her desk, turned it toward me, and tapped a highlighted passage. Financial exploitation of anyone over 60. If we prove they're attempting to defraud you, this becomes more than civil litigation. It becomes criminal. I leaned forward, reading the text. Penalties range from fines to prison time. The language was clear. Knowingly obtaining control over an elderly person's resources through deception, constituted a felony. You think this applies? I think we build the case that way. She closed the book. They're claiming you promised money. We'll show they fabricated promises to steal your retirement savings. That's textbook exploitation. The word steal resonated. That's exactly what this was. The following morning, I drove to my bank on Cantrell Road. I'd been banking there for 23 years, long enough that most of the staff knew me by name. The customer service representative, a pleasant woman named Diana, helped me request a full decade of transaction history. That's going to be quite a stack, Mr. Gordon. She typed on her keyboard, waited for the printer to warm up. Any particular reason? Legal matter. I kept it vague. Need documentation. The printer whirred for 15 minutes straight. Diana brought me the statements in a folder, thick enough to use as a doorstop. I carried it to my car, placed it carefully on the passenger seat, and drove home, feeling the weight of documented truth. At my desk that evening, I created a spreadsheet. Column headers, date, amount, purpose, documentation type, notes. I entered every transaction to Gertrude over the past 10 years. Birthday checks, Christmas gifts. The $5,000 loan in 2022, repaid with interest. A $2,000 emergency car repair in 2020. Every transfer over $500 had paper backup. Signed loan agreements. Thank you cards saved in a shoebox. Email confirmations. Even the smaller gifts had patterns. Always the same amounts on the same occasions, year after year. Mr. Gordon, you've maintained excellent records. That's what Diana had said while the printer ran. Every transfer over $500 has corresponding documentation. That's unusual discipline. Unusual for most people, maybe. Standard practice for a CPA. I pulled 3 years of emails next, exporting them from my computer into searchable files. The correspondence painted a clear picture. Gertrude asking about my health, complaining about work stress, mentioning money troubles but never requesting help. And there, in an email from last April, my own words stared back at me. I read it aloud to myself, then called Grace and read it to her. Be careful about overextending yourselves financially. Don't take on more house than you can afford. Her response came quickly. That's gold. You weren't promising money. You were warning them against exactly what they did. Should I send it now? Send everything. I want copies of the whole correspondence file. My phone buzzed while I was attaching documents to the email. A text message from Gertrude. You're tearing this family apart. Everyone will know what kind of father you really are. You'll regret this. I read it twice, then opened my phone's screenshot function, saved the image to a folder I'd created titled Evidence Harassment. Set the phone face down on my desk. It buzzed again 10 minutes later. Marvin this time. Selfish old man. Hope your money keeps you warm at night. Screenshot. Save. Face down. The messages continued over the next week. Accusations of destroying the family. Threats about revealing truths. Attempts at guilt wrapped in anger. I documented each one without responding. Grace had been clear. Don't engage. Every message they send without a response from you shows their harassment. Every threat they make becomes evidence. I ran into Marcus at the coffee shop on Kavanaugh the following Thursday. We'd worked together at the firm 15 years ago, stayed in touch loosely after he'd moved to a credit union downtown. He waved me over to his table. Truman, haven't seen you in months. How's retirement treating you? Can't complain. I ordered coffee at the counter, joined him at his small table near the window. Staying busy. We talked about golf, about his grandchildren, about the unseasonably warm weather. Then he mentioned it casually, almost as an aside. Hey, didn't know you were dealing with family money stuff. Ran into Marvin at our branch last month. Tried to get a title loan against his car. We couldn't approve it. Credit's pretty rough. My coffee cup paused halfway to my mouth. Marvin tried to get a loan? Yeah, emergency situation apparently. Needed cash quick. Marcus shrugged. His credit score wouldn't support it. Too many red flags in the report. We finished our coffee, said goodbye in the parking lot. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine, staring through the windshield at nothing in particular. Marvin needed emergency cash. Bad credit. Red flags. They'd bought a $500,000 house they couldn't afford, then immediately demanded I pay for it. Now they were suing for $700,000. The pieces weren't just connecting. They were snapping together with the precision of a balance sheet, finally reconciling. This wasn't about family obligations or broken promises. This was about desperation. They were drowning financially, and they'd decided I was their life raft. I started the car and drove home slowly, my mind calculating implications the way it had calculated tax liabilities and audit risks for 35 years. Every number told a story. Every pattern revealed truth. The story emerging here was darker than I'd imagined. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in early May. I didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway, a habit from my working years when unknown numbers might be clients. Truman, it's Helen, my ex-wife's sister. We'd been cordial over the years, exchanging Christmas cards and brief conversations at family gatherings. Her tone now carried something else entirely. Gertrude called me in tears. Helen's voice mixed disappointment with accusation. She said you refused to help them with the house after promising for years. Family takes care of family, Truman. What's happened to you? I listened to her 5-minute lecture about obligations and responsibility, and how my daughter needed support during difficult times. When she finally paused for breath, I responded in a flat, measured tone. This is a legal matter. I won't discuss it outside of court. Goodbye, Helen. I ended the call and added her number to a list I'd started. Contacted relatives. She was the third that week. Gertrude and Marvin were running a campaign, spreading their version of events through the family network. Poor abandoned daughter, heartless wealthy father, broken promises and betrayal. The narrative was effective because it was simple, and people rarely questioned simple stories. Grace called that afternoon with different news. I looked into Patricia Morrison. She spoke with the satisfaction of someone who'd confirmed a suspicion. She's a contingency fee specialist, takes weak cases, files aggressive lawsuits, then pushes hard for quick settlements. It's a numbers game. Defendants pay to make problems disappear. I sat at my kitchen table, phone pressed to my ear. So, they're expecting me to settle. Probably for around $50,000, maybe less. Enough to make this go away without trial. Grace paused. They're banking on you being reasonable. Reasonable. The word tasted bitter. Most people are. Most people pay something to avoid court, avoid stress, avoid having their lives disrupted. Morrison knows this. She's built a practice on it. I looked out the window at my small backyard, at the garden I'd maintained for 2 decades. Reasonable would be easier. Reasonable would let me return to my quiet retirement. Reasonable would cost me $50,000 and my self-respect. File the counterclaim, I said. I'm not paying anything. Not $50,000, not $50. They chose this path. The next morning, I drove to Grace's office and signed the counterclaim documents. Each page declared the original lawsuit frivolous, demanded they pay my legal costs, accused them of knowingly filing false allegations. My signature felt heavier with each page. This escalates everything, Grace warned as I dated the final page. They'll get angry. The family pressure will increase. I understand, but I needed more than documents and declarations. I needed to understand what I was really fighting. Marcus's comment about Marvin's credit problems kept circling through my mind, a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit into the picture I could see. Grace referred me to a private investigator, gave me a name and number without elaboration. I called from my car, scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. The PI's office occupied a bland commercial building in West Little Rock, the kind of place where small businesses rented space month to month. His name was Donald Reeves, and he looked exactly like someone who spent his career uncovering secrets, weathered face, tired eyes, absolutely no interest in small talk. Financial investigation? He sat behind a metal desk in a room containing almost nothing else. What are we looking for? I explained the situation. The lawsuit, the house, the credit problems I'd heard about. Reeves took notes on a yellow pad, asked for Marvin's full name, address, known employment history, vehicle information. Mr. Gordon, I'll be direct. He set down his pen and looked at me. Financial investigations usually reveal exactly what you don't want to find. If there's something ugly here, you'll see it. Still want to proceed? I thought about Gertrude's text messages, Marvin's sneer across my kitchen table, the $700,000 lawsuit demanding nearly everything I owned. Yes, I wrote him a check for $2,500 and drove home feeling strange. I'd hired someone to investigate my son-in-law, my daughter's husband, family. Except They'd stopped treating me like family the moment they'd decided I was an asset to be liquidated. The week crawled past. I maintained my routines, morning walks, afternoon reading, evening news, but everything felt suspended, waiting. Grace filed the counterclaim. Patricia Morrison responded with an angry letter demanding we withdraw it. Grace ignored her. Then the manila envelope arrived. Reeves had delivered it personally, dropping it at my door without ringing the bell. I found it when I returned from my walk, my name written in black marker across the front. Inside were 15 pages of documentation. Bank records, credit reports, transaction histories, collection notices, all centered on Marvin Hayes. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, the same table where this nightmare had started, and began reading. Online gambling, multiple platforms, transactions going back 18 months, small bets at first, growing larger, wins followed by bigger losses chasing the wins. The pattern was textbook, predictable, devastating. Current debt across all platforms, $85,247. I set the papers down and stared at the wall. Not $8,500, not $8,000. $85,000 in gambling debts, accumulated secretly while they lived in their rental house and drove their leased Lexus and bought a $520,000 home they couldn't begin to afford. The lawsuit wasn't about broken promises or family obligations. It wasn't even really about the house. It was about escaping. They'd dug themselves into a hole so deep that my retirement savings looked like their only way out. Take the old man's money, pay off the debts, start fresh. I gathered the pages carefully, returned them to the envelope, and placed it in my filing cabinet under Evidence Financial. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. The anger had burned away, leaving something colder and more focused behind. They'd made a critical mistake. They'd assumed I was just a lonely old man who'd eventually give in. They'd forgotten I'd spent 35 years reading financial statements, finding discrepancies, following money trails through mazes of deception. This was what I did. This was what I'd always been good at. And now I had ammunition. The call came 3 days later. Reeves, the PI, asking if I could stop by his office. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't routine follow-up. I drove across town that afternoon, already knowing this would change something. The second manila envelope sat on his desk when I arrived, thinner than the first, but somehow more ominous. Your son-in-law has loan shark problems. Reeves opened the envelope and pulled out photographs. I documented 2 separate collection attempts at his workplace, and based on what I observed between him and your daughter, I'd say she's learning about this in real time. The first photo showed 2 men in jeans and leather jackets approaching Marvin outside an office building. Their body language radiated threat. The second captured Marvin's face, pale, cornered. Then Reeves showed me the others, time-stamped from yesterday evening. Gertrude and Marvin in their driveway, visible from the street. Her hands raised in disbelief, his defensive posture. Her face twisted with shock and fury. She didn't know, I said aloud, processing what I was seeing. That's my assessment. Reeves tapped the photo. This is someone receiving bad news, not discussing known problems. Whatever your son-in-law's been doing, he kept it from her until recently. I gathered the photographs and drove straight to Grace's office. She cleared her conference table, and I spread the images across the polished wood surface like dealing cards. Grace studied each one carefully, her expression sharpening with recognition. If we can show Gertrude was manipulated by Marvin's desperation, it changes the narrative. She looked up at me. The lawsuit becomes his scheme, not hers. The judge might view her differently. It could protect her from criminal charges. Something twisted in my chest. For a moment, I saw my daughter at 8 years old, skin knee from falling off her bicycle, crying in my arms. Then I remembered her words across my kitchen table. You were never really a father. She still signed the papers. My voice came out measured, harder than intended. Still made those threats. Even if Marvin pushed her into this, she went along. Does it matter if she knew why? Grace set down the photograph. Legally, it might. Morally, that's your call to make. I left her office with the photos and drove home through late afternoon traffic. The house felt empty when I walked in, more so than usual. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat at my desk staring at the PI's report. Gertrude had married Marvin 8 years ago. I'd been cordial at the wedding, given them a generous check, hoped for the best. Had she known then what kind of man he was? Or had she discovered it gradually, layer by layer, until she was in too deep to escape without destroying everything? The thought lingered for perhaps 5 minutes before I deliberately opened my filing cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Evidence Harassment. I read through her text messages again, the threats, the accusations, the public campaign to paint me as a villain. Whatever Marvin had done, she'd chosen to weaponize our relationship rather than come to me honestly. That was her decision, her responsibility. I closed the folder and filed it away. The certified letter arrived the next morning. Bank letterhead, legal department. I opened it standing in my kitchen, reading the formal language twice to be sure I understood. Due to pending civil litigation, they recommended I be aware that the court could potentially freeze assets as security against the judgment. They weren't required to warn me, the letter explained, but given my long relationship with the institution, they wanted me informed of the possibility. For the first time since this started, I felt genuine fear. Not anger, not betrayal, fear. They could lock me out of my own money. Decades of careful savings, trapped behind a court order, while lawyers argued over documents. I called the bank within minutes and scheduled an emergency appointment with a financial advisor for that afternoon. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. Arkansas law protected retirement accounts from civil judgments. I could transfer $400,000 from my savings into an IRA. The money would remain mine, accessible through the IRA rules, but untouchable by any court ruling in Gertrude's favor. Mr. Gordon, this asset protection is legal and smart given pending litigation. The advisor spoke carefully as I signed the transfer forms. But understand, it looks defensive. Opposing counsel will argue you're hiding money. Be prepared for that characterization. I'm prepared for a lot of things. The transfer completed within hours. I watched the computer screen as $400,000 moved from vulnerable to protected. It felt like moving pieces on a board, anticipating my opponent's next play and blocking it before they could make the move. That evening, secure in my protection, my phone buzzed with a text message. Gertrude's name appeared on the screen. Dad, not too late to fix this the easy way. Agree to $200,000 and we withdraw everything. Think about it. Family doesn't have to end this way. $200,000, down from $700,000. They were negotiating with themselves, getting desperate enough to accept a fraction of their original demand. I read the message 3 times, considering my response. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, then I set the phone face down on my desk and walked away. If they wanted an answer, my silence would provide it. Compromise had been possible once, maybe in those first moments when Gertrude presented the mortgage documents. Not after the lawsuit, not after the threats, not after discovering the gambling debts and the manipulation and the calculated destruction of my reputation. That ship hadn't just sailed, it had sunk. I retrieved the PI's report from my briefcase one more time, studying the photograph of Gertrude's face during that driveway argument. She looked genuinely shocked, genuinely angry at Marvin. But she was still texting me settlement offers, still working with him. Whatever she'd learned about his debts, she hadn't walked away. She'd doubled down. Maybe she was manipulated. Maybe she was a victim too. But she was also still trying to take my money. I filed the report with the others and turned off the lights. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, whatever came next. A week passed in careful preparation. Grace scheduled a comprehensive strategy session for late May, 3 weeks before our trial date. When I arrived at her office, she'd transformed the conference room into something resembling a prosecutor's war room. Evidence covered every surface. Bank records stacked on the left side of the table. PI reports in the center. Printouts of text messages, emails, and digital correspondence arranged on the right. Audio recording transcripts on the far right. We have everything. Grace gestured at the display like a general reviewing troops before deployment. Financial records proving no promises. Evidence his debts motivated the lawsuit. Her threats documented. Your recordings showing you advised restraint. The judge will see a clear pattern of attempted exploitation. I walked along the table, reviewing each component. 35 years of professional training had taught me to appreciate thorough documentation. This was more than thorough. This was overwhelming. Then Grace slid a different document across the table. A legal motion, formally typed, citations in the margins. This motion changes everything. Her tone shifted, became heavier. If the judge finds probable cause for elder exploitation, it goes to the prosecutor. Criminal investigation. Possible charges. Your daughter could face felony counts. You need to be certain. I picked up the motion and read through it slowly. Arkansas Code, Paragraph 5 to 25's 111. Financial exploitation of the elderly. Class C felony. Up to 10 years imprisonment. 10 years. The words sat in my chest like stones. Give me until tomorrow, I said. That evening I drove home and sat at my desk with the motion in front of me. Outside, the sun set behind my neighbor's oak tree, painting the office in amber light that faded to gray. Gertrude with a felony conviction. Gertrude in prison. The thought pulled at something deep inside me, some instinct that had nothing to do with logic or justice or right and wrong, just the image of my daughter, my child, facing those consequences. I sat there for an hour, maybe longer, wrestling with the decision. Then I deliberately opened my laptop and clicked on the folder labeled Threats. The screenshots loaded one by one. Her messages, her accusations, her public campaign to destroy my reputation. You're tearing this family apart. Everyone will know what kind of father you really are. You'll regret this. I closed the laptop and picked up my phone. Grace answered on the second ring. She called me a failure as a father. My voice came out steady, resolved. She threatened me publicly. She tried to take everything I worked for. Yes, file it. Understood. I'll submit it with our response next week. 2 days later, my phone rang. Gertrude's name on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. Dad, please. Her voice was thick with tears, breaking between words. Just coffee, no lawyers, no fighting. I need to talk to you person to person. We're still family, aren't we? Please. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, listening for the manipulation beneath the emotion. It was there, faint but present. When? Tomorrow morning? That coffee shop on Kavanaugh? The one you like? After we hung up, I called Grace. She wants to meet privately. Should I go? Arkansas is a one-party consent state. Grace's response was immediate, practical. If you record the conversation without telling her, it's legal. Bring your phone. Keep it recording. See what she says when she thinks there are no witnesses. The next morning, I tested the voice recorder app on my phone 3 times before leaving the house. Positioned the phone in my shirt pocket with the microphone facing upward. Practiced walking, sitting, moving naturally while ensuring the fabric wouldn't muffle the audio. I felt ridiculous and necessary in equal measure. The coffee shop was moderately busy at 9 a.m., enough people for plausible privacy, but enough witnesses to ensure nothing dramatic could happen. I arrived early, ordered black coffee, and chose a corner table. Gertrude walked in 10 minutes later. No Marvin. She looked thinner than I remembered, tired around the eyes. She sat across from me without ordering anything. Thank you for coming. Her hands were clasped on the table, knuckles white. I didn't know if you would. I'm here. I kept my voice neutral. What did you want to say? What followed was a carefully constructed performance. She talked about family, about misunderstandings, about how things had gotten out of hand. She cried twice, dabbed at her eyes with a napkin from the dispenser. She mentioned my mother, how disappointed she would be to see us like this. I sat quietly, letting her talk, acutely aware of the phone in my pocket capturing every word. Then her tone shifted. You don't understand what you're doing. The tears dried up, replaced by something harder. If you push this to trial and we lose, we'll go to the press. We'll tell them everything about you. Your reputation will be destroyed. There it was, the threat beneath the tears. The real reason for this meeting. I stood up, dropped $5 on the table for the coffee I hadn't touched. See you in court. Dad, wait. I was already walking away, pushing through the coffee shop door into bright morning sunlight. Behind me, I heard her call my name again, but I kept walking to my car. My hands were steady as I started the engine. The phone in my pocket felt warm from recording. I'd come to the meeting with questions about whether I was doing the right thing, whether the criminal motion was too far, whether I should find some path to reconciliation. Gertrude had answered all of them in less than 30 minutes. The recording would be transcribed by Grace's office. It would be submitted as evidence. A judge would hear my daughter threaten to destroy me in the press if I didn't surrender. I drove home through streets I'd driven for 20 years, seeing them with new clarity. The trees were green with late spring growth. The sky was cloudless blue. Everything looked ordinary and beautiful and completely transformed. 3 weeks until trial. I was ready. 3 weeks passed in careful routine. I walked each morning, reviewed documents each afternoon, and slept better than I'd expected. Grace handled the procedural filings. The criminal motion sat somewhere in the prosecutor's office, waiting. Trial day arrived on a Tuesday in mid-June. The Pulaski County Courthouse loomed downtown, all stone columns and official gravity. Grace met me at the entrance at 8:30, both of us dressed in conservative business attire that felt like armor. Security took 15 minutes. Belt off, shoes off, briefcase through the scanner. The metal detector beeped twice before the guard waved me through. I collected my belongings and followed Grace down a marble hallway that smelled like floor polish and old wood. Through the courtroom door's window, I spotted them. Gertrude in a navy dress, hair pulled back, looking younger than her 37 years. Marvin beside her in an ill-fitting suit, already sweating despite the air conditioning. Their attorney, Patricia Morrison, shuffled papers at the plaintiff's table. Ready? Grace's hand rested briefly on my shoulder. I nodded and we entered. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined from television, more intimate. Wood paneling covered the walls. Judge's bench elevated at the front, 2 tables facing it, plaintiffs on the left, defense on the right. A handful of people scattered in the gallery seating behind us. I took my seat at the defense table. Across the aisle, Gertrude stared at her hands. Marvin whispered something to Morrison, gesturing. Neither of them looked at me. All rise. Judge Glenn Kowalski entered through a side door. 60-something, gray hair, reading glasses perched on his nose. His reputation preceded him, fair but tough, intolerant of nonsense. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with the expression of someone who'd seen every variety of human conflict. Be seated. Court is in session. Case number CV 2025-3847, Hayes versus Gordon. Ms. Morrison, your opening statement. Patricia Morrison stood and approached the podium. She wore a burgundy suit and an expression of practiced concern. Your Honor, this is a case about broken promises and parental betrayal. Her voice carried theatrical weight, rising and falling like a sermon. For years, Truman Gordon told his daughter he would support her, that his resources were for her future. When she finally asked for help, he turned his back. She gestured toward Gertrude, then pointed at me. This man made commitments. Oral commitments, yes, but commitments nonetheless. His daughter relied on his word. She made life decisions based on his assurances. And now he refuses to honor what he promised. Morrison spoke for 20 minutes, painting a picture of devoted daughter and selfish father. She used phrases like broken trust and parental obligation and reasonable expectations. She demanded $700,000 for emotional damages and breach of oral commitments. I sat perfectly still, letting her perform. Grace had warned me they'd go for emotion. We'd respond with facts. When Morrison finished, Judge Kowalski called Gertrude to the stand. She was sworn in, took her seat, and transformed into the performance I'd anticipated. He always said he'd take care of me. Her voice broke slightly, perfectly timed. When I was young, when I got married, even recently, he'd say, "Don't worry, I'll make sure you're secure." I believed him. We made plans based on his word. She talked about conversations we'd never had, promises I'd never made, a relationship that existed only in her testimony. Marvin gripped her hand when she returned to the table, both of them projecting united victimhood. Judge Kowalski made notes throughout. His face revealed nothing. Ms. Pemberton, your opening. Grace stood, but she didn't go to the podium. She walked to the laptop connected to the courtroom's display screen and pressed a button. A bank statement appeared on the wall-mounted monitor, enlarged and crystal clear. Your Honor, the plaintiff claims my client made oral promises worth $700,000. Grace's voice was calm, almost conversational. Yet in 10 years of bank records, there's not one transaction supporting such an agreement. Not one email, not one text message. Another button. An email appeared on screen. My own words from last year. Be careful about overextending yourselves financially. Don't take on more house than you can afford. This is what Mr. Gordon actually said to his daughter, warning her, advising restraint. the opposite of promising financial support. Grace moved through the evidence methodically: bank statements, correspondence, documented transactions. Each piece projected larger than life on the courtroom wall. Morrison objected halfway through. "Your Honor, oral agreements have legal standing in Arkansas. My client's testimony about these conversations constitutes evidence of a binding commitment." Grace didn't miss a beat. Arkansas Code 42201, the statute of frauds, requires contracts for goods over $500 to be in writing. She looked directly at the judge. "We're discussing $700,000. Without written evidence, this isn't a contract. It's wishful thinking." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Someone in the back row whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Judge Kowalski raised his hand, and the room fell silent immediately. The gavel's strike echoed off the wood paneling. Judge Kowalski removed his reading glasses and set them on the bench. He looked past both attorneys, directly at me. "Mr. Gordon, I have one question for you." His voice cut through the courtroom silence. "Did you ever plan to leave an inheritance to your daughter? Please answer honestly." The question hung in the air. Every eye in the room turned toward me. Grace gave me a subtle nod. I stood, buttoning my suit jacket without thinking about it. Old habit from decades of client meetings. I looked Judge Kowalski in the eye. "Your Honor, yes." My voice came out steady, clear. "I have a will drafted 5 years ago naming Gertrude as my sole heir. But that is my choice and my timing. No one has the right to demand my life savings through a fraudulent lawsuit while I'm still living. I deserve to spend my final years with dignity, not fearing financial exploitation from my own family." Across the aisle, Gertrude's face lost its color. Her hands began trembling against the table. Marvin leaned toward her, whispering urgently. His leg bouncing in a nervous rhythm I could see even from my position. Judge Kowalski nodded slowly. "That's a reasonable position, Mr. Gordon." He turned to face the plaintiff's table. "Mrs. Hayes, it appears you're attempting to collect an inheritance while your father is alive, and demanding double what might eventually be yours. That raises very serious questions about motivation." Morrison started to stand, but Grace moved first. "Your Honor, if I may." She walked to the clerk's desk, carrying 3 manila folders. "We have documentation showing Mr. Hayes has $85,000 in gambling debts. We have a recording from 6 days ago where Mrs. Hayes threatened my client with media exposure, and timeline evidence showing they purchased this house without consulting Mr. Gordon, then demanded payment." The clerk stamped receipts as Grace handed over each folder. Judge Kowalski opened the first one, began scanning the contents. His expression shifted from neutral to focused. Morrison rose quickly. "Your Honor, I object to this." "Enough, Ms. Morrison." Judge Kowalski didn't look up from the documents. "I see the pattern here. This case is continued for 3 days while I review all submitted materials. We're adjourned." The gavel struck again. "All rise." Judge Kowalski exited through the side door. The moment he disappeared, the courtroom exhaled. Conversations erupted in the gallery. Morrison began frantically gathering papers at her table. I stood with Grace, collecting our materials into her briefcase. Across the aisle, Gertrude pushed back from the table and hurried toward the exit. Marvin followed, neither of them looking back. They moved like people fleeing a crime scene. Grace touched my elbow, her smile slight but genuine. "That went well." We followed the crowd into the hallway. Gertrude and Marvin were already gone, disappeared into the maze of courthouse corridors. Morrison stood near the elevators, talking intensely on her phone, her back to us. Grace and I walked to the parking garage in silence. The June heat hit us the moment we stepped outside, thick and humid. My car sat in its designated spot, baking in the afternoon sun. 3 days, Grace said as we reached her vehicle 2 rows over. "The judge wants to review everything thoroughly. That's good for us. He's taking this seriously." He saw through them. I unlocked my car, tossed my jacket onto the passenger seat. That question about the will, he knew exactly what he was doing. He's sharp and experienced enough to recognize financial exploitation when he sees it. Grace opened her car door, paused. "Get some rest. When we come back on Friday, I expect a ruling in our favor." I drove home through downtown traffic, replaying the day's events. Gertrude's testimony, carefully rehearsed lies, delivered with practiced tears. Morrison's theatrical objections. The moment Judge Kowalski had asked his question and the entire proceeding had shifted. But most of all, I replayed Gertrude's face when I'd mentioned the will. The realization washing over her that she'd always been provided for, that her inheritance was secure, and she'd chosen to destroy our relationship anyway. She could have waited, could have trusted, could have come to me honestly instead of with demands and lawsuits and threats. Instead, she'd gambled everything on a fraudulent claim and lost. Back home, I changed into comfortable clothes and made coffee I actually drank this time. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a weight had lifted from the walls themselves. 3 days until the verdict. 3 days until this nightmare reached its conclusion. I sat in my home office with the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, thinking about that moment in the courtroom. Standing before a judge, stating clearly and firmly that I had the right to control my own life and resources. That dignity mattered. That exploitation was unacceptable regardless of family ties. 35 years of professional restraint, of measuring words and containing emotions, had trained me for exactly that moment. Grace's words echoed, "That went well." It had gone better than well. Judge Kowalski had seen the pattern, the gambling debts, the threats, the manipulation, the timeline showing a calculated ambush rather than family communication. He'd seen it all, and unless I was completely misreading the situation, he was preparing to rule in my favor, not just dismiss their lawsuit, but potentially refer the matter to prosecutors for criminal investigation under that exploitation statute Grace had filed. Gertrude and Marvin had rushed from the courtroom, like people who knew the walls were closing in. I finished my coffee and walked to the window. My neighbor was mowing his lawn, the sound rhythmic and ordinary. The oak tree in my backyard swayed gently in the breeze. Everything looked exactly as it had this morning, yet somehow transformed. 3 more days. I could wait 3 more days. Victory was near. I could feel it the way you feel rain coming before the first drops fall. The 3 days passed slowly. I maintained my routine, but felt suspended between outcomes, waiting for the final word. Grace called once to confirm Friday morning at 9 o'clock. Nothing else needed saying. When Friday arrived, I dressed in the same suit I'd worn on Tuesday. Grace met me at the courthouse entrance again, and we repeated our path through security, down the marble hallway, into the courtroom. Gertrude and Marvin were already seated. Morrison sat beside them, her posture suggesting someone preparing for unpleasant news. None of them looked at us as we took our places at the defense table. "All rise." Judge Kowalski entered carrying a folder, thick with documents. He settled into his chair, adjusted his glasses, and opened the folder deliberately. "Be seated. I've reviewed all materials submitted in this matter." He looked at both tables, his expression giving nothing away. "After thorough review of all evidence, this court finds no credible proof of oral contracts or promises. The plaintiff's case lacks documentation, contemporaneous evidence, or reliable corroboration." He paused, let the words settle. "Accordingly, the complaint is dismissed with prejudice." I exhaled slowly. Beside me, Grace's hand touched my forearm briefly. Across the aisle, Gertrude's head dropped forward. Marvin's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. But Judge Kowalski wasn't finished. "Furthermore, the defendant's counterclaim is granted. Plaintiffs Gertrude Hayes and Marvin Hayes are ordered to pay defendants' legal costs in the amount of $18,500 within 60 days. Marvin's hand gripped the table edge, knuckles going white. Morrison shuffled papers, avoiding her client's eyes. Judge Kowalski's expression grew graver. Finally, based on evidence presented regarding potential financial exploitation of an individual over 60 years of age, I am referring this matter to the Pulaski County Prosecutor's Office for investigation under Arkansas Code, Section 5-25-111. The courtroom went silent. This was different from dismissal. This was criminal. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. We filed into the hallway. Gertrude immediately leaned against the wall, crying uncontrollably. Marvin stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, staring at the floor. Morrison walked briskly past them toward the exit without a word, her heels clicking efficiently against marble. Grace pulled me aside, spoke quietly. "The criminal referral is significant. If the prosecutor files charges, they're looking at Class C felony counts. That means up to 10 years imprisonment, substantial fines, and criminal records. This just became very serious for them." I nodded, watching Gertrude cry. She looked small against that wall, diminished by the weight of consequences she'd never imagined. "Give me a moment," I said to Grace. I walked toward them. Marvin saw me coming and straightened slightly, defensive. Gertrude looked up through tears, her face blotchy and swollen. I stood 2 feet away, looking down at my daughter, the child I'd raised, the woman who'd tried to destroy me. "You had everything from me." My voice came out quiet but clear. "Love, support, education, security. But you decided you were entitled to my money while I'm still living. You chose this path with threats and manipulation. Now you face what comes from those choices." Gertrude opened her mouth, closed it. Tears streamed down her face. I turned and walked away. My footsteps echoed in the hallway. Behind me, I heard her voice calling Dad once, broken and desperate. I didn't look back. Grace waited by the exit doors. We walked through together into June sunshine. The heat felt clean after the courthouse's recycled air. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it. Tired. Not triumphant, not vengeful. Just exhausted by the entire ordeal, by watching my daughter destroy herself with greed and lies. We said goodbye in the parking garage. Grace promised to send final paperwork within the week. I thanked her for everything, shook her hand, and drove home. The house was quiet when I arrived. I changed into comfortable clothes, made lunch I barely tasted, and sat in my living room staring at nothing in particular. I'd won, completely. The lawsuit dismissed, legal costs awarded, criminal investigation opened, everything I'd fought for achieved. But winning felt hollow. A family relationship lay shattered beyond repair. My daughter faced potential felony charges. Whatever inheritance she might have received someday was now uncertain at best. She'd forced this, every step of it, the ambush, the lawsuit, the threats, the manipulation. She'd chosen this path with clear eyes and deliberate intent. And yet, I sat there until evening shadows filled the room, thinking about the little girl who'd once trusted me completely. Before Marvin, before greed, before whatever had twisted her into someone capable of such calculated cruelty. That girl was gone. Had been gone for years, maybe. I'd just been too stubborn or too hopeful to admit it. The phone didn't ring. No one came to the door. The world continued turning, indifferent to personal dramas played out in courtrooms. I went to bed early that night and slept better than I had in months. The fight was over. Justice had been served. Tomorrow I could begin thinking about what came next. But tonight, I just needed rest. 2 months passed before I heard from her again. Summer settled over Little Rock with its usual heavy heat. I returned to my routines, morning walks, afternoon reading, occasional lunch with former colleagues. Grace sent me final paperwork. The legal costs check arrived from Gertrude and Marvin 3 days before the 60-day deadline. Through Grace, I learned the prosecutor had filed charges. Against Marvin only. They'd offered Gertrude immunity in exchange for testimony. She took it, Grace told me over the phone. She's confirmed that Marvin initiated everything and hid his gambling problems from her. He's pleading guilty to avoid trial, probation, restitution, but no prison time. I processed this information without emotion. Gertrude had saved herself by testifying against her husband. Practical, self-preserving, completely predictable. "Their house is for sale," Grace added. "I saw the listing online. They can't afford the mortgage payments." "I see. One more thing. I heard through a colleague that they're separating. The marriage isn't surviving this." I thanked Grace for the information and hung up. Later, I looked up the house listing out of curiosity. 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, Chenal Valley. Listed for $495,000, $25,000 less than they'd paid. Desperate pricing from desperate people. I closed the browser and didn't look again. That afternoon, I drove to an estate attorney's office downtown. Not Grace. This required different expertise. I'd made an appointment the previous week. "I want to revise my will," I told him. We spent 2 hours working through details. The new will directed 90% of my assets to a charitable foundation supporting elderly victims of financial abuse. Gertrude would receive $50,000. Not nothing, but not everything either. "This directs the bulk of your estate to the Elder Financial Protection Foundation," the attorney confirmed. "Your daughter receives $50,000. The language is clear. It's a deliberate choice, not an oversight. This will stand up to any challenge." I signed each page, initialed the margins, watched him notarize my signature. He gave me a copy in a leather folder. Driving home, I felt something settle inside me. The money would serve a purpose beyond my lifetime. It would help others facing what I'd faced. Gertrude would receive enough to show I hadn't completely disinherited her, but not enough to reward her behavior. Fair, principled, right. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in mid-August. I recognized her handwriting on the envelope immediately, stood at the mailbox holding it, feeling the weight of paper and ink and whatever she'd chosen to say. Inside, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where this nightmare had begun. Finally, I opened the envelope carefully. Her handwriting covered 2 pages, no flourishes, plain, direct words. Dad, I understand what I did. Marvin manipulated me, but I made my own choice to go along with the lawsuit. That's on me. I'm not asking for forgiveness now. Maybe someday we could talk, not as father and daughter like before. Maybe just as 2 people who share history. I'll wait. Gertrude. I read it twice, set it down, stared through the window at my backyard where the oak tree swayed gently in afternoon breeze. She took responsibility. That was something. She wasn't demanding anything. That was different from before. But words on paper didn't erase what had happened. Trust took years to build, seconds to destroy. She'd destroyed it thoroughly. Maybe someday we could talk, she'd written. Maybe. I folded the letter carefully, walked to my desk, and placed it in the drawer with other important documents. Not thrown away, not displayed, filed, preserved, but not acted upon. Not now. Perhaps not ever. But maybe someday. The decision could wait. I changed into walking clothes, laced my shoes, and stepped outside. The morning air was warm, but not oppressive yet. August in Arkansas, summer beginning its slow fade toward autumn. My neighbor was watering his lawn. He waved when he saw me. Truman, haven't seen you out walking in a while. Good to see you back at it. Yes, I said. Feels good to be back. Beautiful morning. I walked my usual route, 3 miles through the neighborhood, past familiar houses and carefully maintained lawns. My legs remembered the rhythm. My mind wandered pleasantly, thinking about nothing in particular. For the first time in months, I felt light, unburdened. The weight that had pressed on me since that March morning when I'd found them waiting on my porch, gone. Not forgotten, but no longer crushing. Justice had been served through proper channels. The legal system had worked as designed. My dignity remained intact, my autonomy restored, my assets protected and directed according to my values. Gertrude had faced consequences. Marvin had faced consequences. They'd learned, painfully, that elderly people weren't easy targets just because they were older. I rounded the corner onto Mockingbird Lane, approaching my house from the same direction I had that March morning. Everything looked the same. My small, paid-off house. The porch where they'd ambushed me. The driveway where their Lexus had sat. But I was different. Tested, proven, vindicated. The lawsuit was dismissed. The criminal investigation had proceeded. The estate was revised. The letter was filed away. Life continued. On my terms. I climbed the porch steps, unlocked my door, and went inside to start the day. There was coffee to make, news to read, a life to live. Tomorrow I'd walk again, and the day after that. Regular routines, peaceful mornings, years ahead to live as I chose. That was victory enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.